The 1970s. At the luxurious Riviera Casino in Las Vegas, the final match of the Gan Ramy card game tournament was underway. One of the last two players was a known professional named Gods, who had won 6 major tournaments. Across from him sat a lanky kid who looked no older than 16. The prizes were distributed as follows. The winner received $50,000, and second place received half that amount. The pro offered the youngster a deal to combine the prize money for first and second place and split it evenly. The young man made a counteroffer to pull the prizes and agreed that the winner takes all. The brush kid was named Stu Unger. By the early 80s, he would become a legend in Las Vegas. Today, we will tell the story of one of the greatest poker players in history. Stu Unger's childhood was spent in the clubs amidst tobacco smoke and the din of gambling bets. His father owned one of the largest bookmakers in New York. Daily, hordes of clients would cross into his bar to grab a beer, watch sport matches, and immediately place bets on the outcomes. Stu was left to his own devices in this place. He was fascinated both by the gambling atmosphere and the colorful crowd. He watched how fervently the players at the table played stacks of money and dreamed of soon becoming part of this world. As soon as Stu entered 6th grade, he began to help his father, compiling lists of winners and losers. His mother, who often dropped by the club to play cards, invariably ended up among the latter. I watched sitting right behind her. She played terribly. She entered every hand with any cards, never raised the bets. I watched as she lost time after time. I saw the self-satisfied faces of the opponents. They thought they were cool, but they played not much better than her. Their attitude towards my mother affected me. I wanted to take her place and wipe the smirk off their faces. Stu would later recall. Stu's aspiration to become a professional card player infuriated his father. But Stu could not envision another future for himself. Office work seemed to him the lot of losers. The excitement, the joy of winning, the opportunity to get one over on someone captivated him more than anything else. After his father's death, the 14-year-old Stu Unger started spending all his time wandering around New York's gambling establishments. One day, he noticed a bored patron in the club. "Shall we play?" Stu offered. "What?" the man lazily inquired. "Gene, the bet is $20. That's all I have." The man agreed, and the pair secluded themselves with a deck of cards in a corner of the bar. Stu Unger didn't know that his opponent was Arthur Bella, one of New York's strongest Gan Ramy players. Gan Ramy is a card game usually played by 2 players. Players try to collect sequences of 3 or 4 cards of the same rank, like 3 jacks, or of the same suit. A set of several such sequences is called a Gene. The game is played 4 points, and the winner is the one who first scores an agreed upon number of points or collects a Gene. The cards barely fit an Unger's hand, but what was supposed to be a cakewalk turned into a real battle. Other patrons approached with interest and stayed to watch the game. After a few minutes, Stu declared, "Gene." Onlookers joked, assuming the youngster was just lucky. But Stu Unger won the next game too, and then another. Arthur silently counted out the due sum to his opponent and saw him to the door with a stunned look. Although for Stu, this victory didn't hold much significance. Word of the match spread throughout New York's gambling establishments. Many wanted to test if the boy was as good as he seemed. At 15, Stu Unger was already regularly outplaying the regulars of the gambling clubs in games they had spent their whole lives on. The nickname Kid stuck to him. Skinny, cocky, sleepy with a mop of dark hair, even at 30 he looked like a teenager. Although many attributed the phenomenon of Stu Unger to talent, it wasn't just that. Stu had a phenomenal memory. Once he bet $1,000 that he could sequentially, by opening cards from a stack of 6 decks, name the last one. And he accurately predicted the 10 of diamonds. It was no trouble for him to keep in mind all the cards that were played and to know which ones remained in the deck. Such a skill is particularly useful in Gan Ramy. Another reason for his success was his extraordinary observance. Stu missed nothing, noticing every detail in the game and the behavior of his opponents. All this combined to understand when an opponent was bluffing or when they had good cards. Stu's ability to read opponents was so astounding that many confessed playing with him. was like holding their cards face up. When professional card player and champion of many tournaments Harry Stein heard that some teenager was considered the greatest Gan Ramy player, he immediately came to New York to teach the upstart a lesson. Stein had no doubt that the match would end quickly. He was right. The American champion lost with a crushing score of 86-0. After that, Harry Stein, it is rumored, never again sat down to a game of Gan. Stu Unger didn't know that his opponent was Arthur Bella, one of New York's strongest Gan Ramy players. Someday, maybe someone will come along who can play poker better than me. I doubt it, but it's possible. However, I can imagine anyone being able to play Gan Ramy better than me, Stu Unger would say years later, when there was no one left in New York who wanted to play with him. Stu headed to the only place where he could still find opponents, Las Vegas. When Stu Unger first arrived in Vegas, he realized he had found his paradise on earth. The clank of slot machines, the crack of roulette, the buzz of excited visitors intoxicated him. Everything around was created with one goal: to satisfy the thirst for gambling. Stu brought with him a suitcase with $30,000, sponsor money, which was supposed to go for playing Gan Ramy. But even before he settled into his hotel room, Unger lost the entire amount at the blackjack and craps tables. Abstaining from gambling was beyond his strength. The sponsors were outraged, but they gave Stu another chance. They wanted Stu to start with small fry. But when he heard that someone named Danny Robinson was considered the best Gan Ramy player, he challenged him to a duel and crushed him. Despite all his talents, Stu lacked one important skill: patience. He didn't know how to tactically fleece opponents. The very thought of backing down to ultimately win more seemed absurd to him. At the card table, he was a killer. Winning wasn't enough. He aimed to destroy his opponents morally. With his victory over Danny Robinson, Unger earned $100,000. But after that, earning money by playing Gan Ramy was out of the question. Stu wasn't even allowed in Gan tournaments, because otherwise, all the players refused to participate. Nobody wants to play when the winner is known in advance. Unger had to find a new game where he could showcase his talent. That game was poker. The most prestigious poker tournament at the time was the World Series of Poker, the unofficial world championship which was attended exclusively by the strongest professionals. In 1980, Stu played in it for the first time. Most of his opponents played a tight style, patiently waiting for a good hand. Unger's aggressive style was markedly different. Stu used the fear of elimination of his opponents, constantly raising bets and forcing them to make tough decisions. Feeling the slightest weakness, he pressed with large bluffs. Most of his opponents simply didn't know how to resist such aggression. Playing with opponents, not with cards. This well-known saying aptly described Stu Unger's play. When there were only 5 out of the 73 registered participants left, all of them were well known to the audience. Doyle Brunson stood out particularly. He was a regular in the most expensive poker games in Vegas and had already won this tournament twice. To those unfamiliar with Stu Unger, it was baffling how a child ended up among such poker titans. When it came down to the final two, the only thing standing between Doyle and his third title was a skinny kid whom few in the room believed would win. But that day, the poker gods favored the newcomer. In 1980, Stu Unger became the youngest champion in the tournament's history. When reporters rushed to him and asked where he planned to spend the $385 prize, Stu, without a hint of doubt, answered that of course he would spend it on gambling. If there was anyone left who doubted that Stu Unger was a force to be reckoned with, the following year he dispelled all doubts by winning the main event of the World Series of Poker for the second consecutive time. Victory in 2 major tournaments gave Stu enough money to become a regular at the most expensive games in Vegas. But while poker was going exceptionally well for him, it was a different story with other gambling pursuits. Almost all the money Unger earned from cards was blown on horse racing, sports betting, and golf games. Stu was ready to bet money on anything. On his first day at the golf course, having barely learned to hold a club, he lost $80,000 betting on his ability to sink a ball in the hole. Within a week, this amount had multiplied several times. No matter how much Stu Unger earned from poker, he always seemed to be on the verge of bankruptcy. Sports betting and horse racing consumed the lion's share of his winnings. The rest was devoured by a lavish style. Legends were told about Stu's generosity. He often treated friends to meals at restaurants, ordering the most expensive champagne and paying multi-thousand-dollar bills. He handed out $100 tips to dealers, valets, and waitstaff. He often loaned money, knowing it was unlikely to be returned. Over time, regular casino patrons began to notice changes in Stu. He stopped taking care of himself, became more irritable, and looked lost. Friends knew that Stu had become heavily dependent on cocaine. The drugs were slowly destroying him from the inside. His addiction not only impacted his game, but also his relationships with loved ones. Stu parted ways with the woman he loved and lost touch with his only dollar. He spent days on end in drug-fueled delirium, and when he returned to the casino, he was merely a shadow of his former self. There was no trace left of the money he had won. Stu had borrowed money before, but now, for the first time in his life, he lied to his sponsors, claiming he needed the money for gambling. He spent it on cocaine instead. In 1990, on the eve of another World Series of Pocker tournament, Stu Unger was broke. He had no money to cover the entry fee. He went to the casino hoping someone would agree to beg the former champion. Once there would have been a line of willing beggars, but not now. Having barely found the money and entered the tournament, at the end of the first day, Stu returned to his hotel room. The next day, he didn't show up for the game. Overnight, Stu took such a dose of drugs that when worried hotel staff found him in his room, he was completely unresponsive. For several days, he was treated at the hospital, while the huge stock of chips Unger had built up on the first day slowly dwindled. The chance to win $1 million for the first place was lost. The winner of the 1990 World Series of Pocker tournament was Iranian poker professional Mansour Matlabi. Stu challenged the new champion. He proposed to play a one-on-one match in no-limit hold'em, where each bet $50,000 and the winner takes all. Despite Stu's reputation, Mansour agreed. The match was evenly matched for the first half hour, and then came a hand that would be called the greatest bluff in poker history. After Stu holding trash cards, checked his opponent, sensing weakness, pushed forward his chips. All in. This means he was betting everything. Stu looked at the community cards, then at his opponent, and said, "You have either 4-5 or 5-6. I call." When Unger flipped his cards, the astounded spectators saw he only had a high card of 10, but it was enough, as the opponent had bluffed with the exact hand Stu had named. In the years that followed, Stu Unger repeatedly tried to get his life back on track, if only for his daughter, with whom he wanted to reconnect. Sometimes Stu managed to keep his addiction under control, but often drugs overpowered him. When in 1997, the day before the start of another poker championship, Stu appeared at the casino. He could barely walk, with 15 minutes left to register. His only hope of entering was to persuade his longtime friend Billy Baxter to put down a $10,000 deposit. Billy, like all of Stu Unger's acquaintances, had long since lost faith in him, but Stu spoke of the tournament as if his entire life depended on it. He could not be denied. Baxter felt like he was throwing money away, but the following few days turned into one of the most incredible comebacks in World Series history. Though Stu played with just a tenth of his former mastery, his aggressive style still gave him a significant advantage over the other participants, squeezing opponents out of big pots. By the end of the first day, he had doubled his stack, and he entered the final table as the chip leader. Despite there being several professionals among the remaining opponents, Stu dominated the entire match. It seemed as if his former form had returned. Or maybe he knew this was his last chance to become a champion again. For his victory in the tournament, Stu Unger received $1 million and a new nickname, the Comeback Kid. In 2003, an ordinary American accountant won the main event of the World Series of Pocker and $2.5 million. A poker boom began around the world, and thousands of enthusiasts started flocking to Vegas every year in hopes of replicating the success. With the popularization of online poker and televised tournament broadcasts, the game's fan base has grown into the millions. Poker professionals have become superstars, and young prodigies playing online have become multimillionaires. However, Stu Unger did not witness all these events. On November 22, 1998, he was found dead in the cheap room of a Las Vegas hotel. The greatest card player in history died of a drug overdose. All that was left from his winnings the year before was a few bucks in his pocket.